Okay, let's start. Mbulelani, are you ready? Risha, are you ready?
Yes,
Yes,
of course.
Okay, okay, we've just one more person. Do you want to walk around maybe to that side where Jane is sitting? Or maybe you can just maybe move, Scott. No, no. This one. Are you okay to sit there?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, great. Okay. You want to sit that side or are you okay there?
It's okay.
It's okay. It's okay. So thank you. Okay. Okay, then colleagues, thank you so much. We've got our chairs online, so I'm kind of like coordinating the local people whilst Risha is chairing, and she can see everybody online as well as in the room. So thank you so much for coming from the ISER. We've got water, refreshments, the toilet is that side, the kitchen is that side. You are free to, as long as you don't disturb the speakers, to sort of walk around. You can't walk to that side, as you saw, there's no roof, there's a construction. So over to you, Risha.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that, Prof. Mbata. So once again, good afternoon and such a warm welcome to everyone that is joining us this afternoon. As many of you may know, that South Africa has one of the highest rates of obesity in the world. So it is so wonderful to see such a great turnout for a relevant and important topic. Before we begin, please note that the seminar is being recorded and it will be made available on the ISER YouTube channel and across our social media platforms. So I'm Risha Karan, I'm the hosting chair this afternoon. And just a very, very brief background about the ISER before we get started. We have 4 key research areas, which include environmental resources management, human and economic development, cross-border trade in Africa, and skills development and education research. So let me just jump into it. It's my greatest pleasure to introduce Dr. Stefan Otterbach and Professor Mike Rogan, who are the speakers this afternoon. I will start with Prof. Rogan. He's an associate professor in the Department of Economics and Economic History, as well as in the Neil Agate Labor Studies Unit here at Rhodes University, where he runs some of their largest projects. He's also an honorary research fellow at the HSRC's Education and Skills Development Research Program and a research associate in the Global Research Policy Action Network, which focuses on women in informal employment, abbreviated as WIGO. So his research interests include gender, informal employment, health, poverty and inequality, food security, education and skills development, and survey design. So lastly, Professor Rogan is a long-standing friend and colleague of the ISER, who so graciously facilitates the seminar in our honors program as well. Dr. Otterbach also has a long-standing relationship with the ISER, which spans for over 10 years and is currently being co-hosted by the ISER and the Department of Economics and Economic History as the 2023 Hobart Houghton Fellow. So interestingly, Hobart Houghton was the ISER's director from 1967 until 1973. So it is very fitting that Dr. Otterbach is being hosted by us. And we also really appreciate his participation in today's seminar. So Stephanie is a senior lecturer and researcher at the Institute for Healthcare and Public Management at the University of Hohenheim. I hope I pronounced that correctly, in Germany. where he specializes in empirical economics. Dr. Otterbach's research interests include food security and nutrition aspects in developing countries, health economics, labor economics, and development economics, where he looks at the impact of working conditions on health and well-being. He has also worked at the Organization of Economic Development and Cooperation, and is a research affiliate of the Institute of the Study of Labor in Germany, Bonn. He is also a member of the Senate Committee on Research at the University of Hohenheim in Germany. So Prof. Rogan and Dr. Otterbach have extensive experience in analyzing large-scale national data sets, which brings us to the focus of today's seminar, which is titled Big Food, Fast Food, and the Proximity to Supermarkets, using Google data to measure the role of fast food in South Africa's obesity epidemic. So using a novel research methodology, the study analyzed whether proximity to big food retailers has an effect on overweight and obesity levels in South Africa, given the obesity pandemic that the country is currently experiencing. So against the backdrop of South Africa having one of the highest rates of obesity in the world, where 31% of men and 68% of women are considered overweight and obese, the study is important as the findings suggest that the shape of food environments need higher policy attention to promote more healthy food choices in South Africa and beyond. So a massive heartfelt thank you to Dr. Otterbach and Professor Rogan for taking the time to be with us this afternoon as we anticipate a very thought-provoking and engaging seminar. This is certainly a very interesting study, and I'm sure that we are all keen to hear about the methodology that was used and also the key findings that have emerged from the study. So lastly, today's seminar will work a bit differently than usual, where we will have two speakers today and no respondent. So Dr. Otterbach and Prof. Rogan will present for about 45 minutes, and thereafter we will have a time for questions and comments. For everyone that's joining us online, please post your comments in the chat box and throughout the presentation, and then we will attend to them at the end of the presentation. And for those who are attending in person, feel free to share your questions with us at the end of the presentation when we have the question and answer session. Yes, so without further delay, it is my privilege to hand over to our speakers today, Prof. Rogan and Dr. Otterbach.
It's okay.
Now we are running your
Yeah.
presentation on your
Okay.
behalf.
Great. Yeah, well, thanks everyone for coming. It's nice to see the turnouts. Stefan and I decided to divide this presentation in a slightly unique way. I'm going to give some sort of context on the collaboration which resulted in this paper, and also say something about the methodology that I don't think Stefan will have time for. And then we're going to allow Stefan to sort of go through the paper in full for two reasons. The first is he's come a lot farther than me and deserves to. And second, his role in this study was really unique, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. But fully deserves to present the paper uninterrupted. But before that, I just want to say how nice it is to have Stefan here. He's been a regular visitor to the ISER since 2009. And I've come to know him in that time, and I can assure you it will be very difficult to find someone who is more interested in South Africa and how it works than Stefan. And he's got the most unique ability to really dig into data to answer interesting and difficult questions. And it's been a real joy to work with him on several projects in that regard. And through that, the work he's been doing, actually knows an amazing amount about South Africa for someone who's not actually South African, but at this stage should be considered honorary or fine for some sort of passport item. Yeah, anyway, that's an aside. I just wanted to say a bit about how this collaboration began. Stefan and I both have an interest in working with these large household surveys that collect information on well-being, health, education, labor markets. We both have an interest in different metrics of well-being. In other words, what these household surveys are able to tell us about how individuals and households are doing, whether it's income or health or labor market or things like quality of life and subjective well-being, which brought us to start talking about some ideas on what sort of research we might want to do together on one of its earlier trips here. And one of the puzzles about South Africa, as I mentioned, Stefan likes to get to grips with puzzles in the data, is that you've heard that South Africa has one of the highest rates of obesity in the world. South Africa is also one of the countries, if not the only country, depending on how you look at it, that didn't make any progress towards child stunting between 2000 and 2015. That was a period when most countries were realizing progress towards the Millennium Development Goals. And South Africa, as an upper middle income country, was not making progress towards reducing child stunting. So if you don't know what child stunting is, it's basically just a proxy measure for malnourishment or undernutrition. And the way we capture this in surveys is there's an expected distribution of height and weight for people of different ages. And if they're underweight given age and height, we classify them as having stunted growth. And that stunted growth is just a proxy for malnourishment, but it has a whole range of other, sometimes long-lasting negative effects on someone's life if they grew up malnourished to the point that they were stunted. So we've got this sort of parallel thing going on where we have an obesity problem where people are too large, obviously, and a stunting problem where people are malnourished to the point where they're not growing, they're smaller than they should be. It seems like a contradiction, but it turns out that it's actually not. Sort of unpack the underlying mechanisms, there is a good explanation for it, but it's certainly something that requires a bit of thinking and data work. So we published a paper, it's been 5 years ago now or more, looking at the prevalence of stunting in urban and rural areas, which often have very different determinants of the risk of children being stunted. And we were pretty surprised to learn that while you have the sort of typical outcome that rural areas have larger rates of stunting, we found that we could explain all of that higher prevalence in rural areas just by controlling for the things we could observe and that you would expect to explain stunting, things like income. But we also found some interesting hints that there was something more than just with stunting and malnutrition, which focuses on food systems more broadly, which may be more prevalent in urban areas and offsetting the disadvantage that households in rural areas have. So we just found some preliminary evidence that there was something going on in our food system, which was contributing to malnutrition that we were picking up through stunting. That then led us to the other sort of key marker of food systems and nutrition, which is, of course, obesity, which is another sort of outcome related to food and food systems. And Stefan has some interesting friends in Germany. One in particular said that he could, I don't know if it's web scraping or using Google data, he was able to pinpoint the geographical location of every supermarket and fast food chain in South Africa and link that to a code, GPS code, and put that into a statistical program. Stefan and I have been using the National Income Dynamics Study, which is run from the University of Cape Town's economics department. And that's a household survey, which measures things like stunting and obesity. And it also contains information on where every household that was a part of that mid-survey is. The problem, of course, is you can't release that information to the public. There's a confidentiality, anonymity, privacy matter related to conducting research. But through a group, part of the economics department called Data First, also at UCT, they've included the full records of the mid-survey in a data secure room at UCT, which allows you to do any analysis in that room that involves sensitive information like the location of that household. The only trick is you have to do the analysis there in person and you can't bring anything in or out of the room with you. So with the help of Stefan's colleague in Germany, we managed to get the data on the location of supermarkets sent to the Data Secure Center in Cape Town. And then we were able to match that with the GPS coordinates of the households in the survey to come up with a proxy measure for how close each household in the mean sample was to the closest supermarket. And Stefan will say more about this, and fast food outlet. This relates to an approach we've encountered in the literature. But what I wanted to mention is what this meant is that Stefan traveled from Germany to sit in this little tiny room with one desk. And I happened to be at UCT for a project at one point. And anyone who's ever been to the Commerce or the Economics building knows that it's this big building with multiple levels and it's completely encased in glass. And I came out of the tea break at my meeting one day and I looked down and on the floor below me, I could see in what looked like a little fish tank, Stefan sitting alone at a desk with several cameras pointed at him. And he was basically taking the code that his German colleague developed and merging that with the data secure data, data first. And I think there's other interesting stories about what you can and can't take out of the room and how you then send your results to yourself later after you've done this sort of incredibly sensitive thing of matching households based on where they are to the nearest supermarket. You can do lots of different things. You can access tax data that's sensitive and personalized as well in that data room. But yeah, that's all went very well until COVID hit and we got our paper accepted in a journal and they said, could you make one tiny change to your analysis? Like sort of said, not only would we have to travel to Cape Town to sit in the data secure room, but all of UCT, as it turned out, for more than a year. So ultimately we prevailed and we published our paper and this chance to sort of present what we found, and we hope it also helps you think a little bit about what type of dynamics are going on with how households, different ends of the income spectrum, get food and what that means for public health and development in general.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Once again, thank you so much, Professor Mike Rogan, and once again, thank you, Professor Mbata at the ISER Institute and Professor Snowball from the Department of Economics and Economic History for having me here. I'm really happy to be here and to give a presentation today in the famous and historical Cecil Manona seminar room. Presentation will be about obesity and how big food, supermarkets and fast food influence our diets, our dietary intakes, and how these contribute to the obesity pandemic here in South Africa. Can I get the first slide, please? So the first slide, I think, looks quite familiar to most of you. On the left side, we see the big supermarket chains, which are located here all over the country. Some of them are for different types of customers. Then you also have on the right-hand side the fast food chains that all probably look also familiar to you. And we call these big food and fast food environments. And we speak about huge and concentrated market power of these companies, these international companies. And this also includes, of course, their penetration via advertisement and in all their offering processed and packaged food and beverages. All right, so a bit more of context. Many low and middle income countries do not only face infectious disease and big public health problems from infectious disease, but also from non-infectious, from non-communicable disease. And these kind of disease are increasing, and they are more commonly associated with the Western world, right? But they now put immense public health problems to low and middle income countries. And most prominent among these non-communicable disease is overweight and obesity, with consequent conditions such as hypertension, heart disease, and diabetes. Also important to note is that these NCTs have disproportionately increased in low and middle income countries compared to the Western world, to the high income countries. And they have now almost converged to high income countries. Next slide, please. So speaking about the South African context, and Risha, you mentioned it already, more than 2/3 among the South African women and about 1/3 of the South African men are either overweight or obese. And among the prevalence among adolescents, it has doubled in a very short time space. Mike has mentioned that already, and is far higher than the global average in South Africa. Very interesting to note is that there is also a comorbidity of undernutrition, malnutrition, stunting, as we mentioned before, and overweight and obesity within the same low-income communities. This is, I think, a very important note. So why is South Africa also very important to study? It is among the few middle-income countries on the African continent, and what is happening here in this country could be very relevant to other African countries when supermarkets and fast food chains emerge there. We also know that South Africa is the most unequal country in terms of how income and wealth are distributed. This is a quote from the World Bank, but it also involves very unequal conditions, such in terms of health or life expectancy. Yeah, and South Africa is also a special case because even 2 decades after the first democratic elections, we still see the apartheid era spatial planning as a consequence, right? What other associated factors could play a role? So there is an ongoing urbanization that migrate from rural parts of the country to the cities. And this also brings a nutritional transition, which brings people away from the traditional diets, more to some Western diets, which include processed, packaged food, often also with added sugar and fat. On the other hand, we see increasing concentration of large food retailers in poor parts of urban locations, right? So these bring access to affordable packaged food. And at the same time, we see an increase in the consumption of snacks, soft drinks, and, as I said, processed food. What is also very important to note is that populations which suffer from malnutrition and/or hunger, they are even at higher risk of obesity when they are exposed to calorie-dense food. Please. So the remaining structure of my presentation you will see here after this bit more comprehensive introduction. I will speak a little bit about the literature, and then I come to our data and methodology, and I will present the results of our own study, and will sum up the results and end up with some policy implication. Next slide, please. So what we know from the literature is unfortunately very limited empirical evidence, because only few papers focus on the link between supermarkets and nutrition and health. So the starting point of these few studies is that once when supermarkets increase, they influence our diets, and supermarket purchases may increase the consumption of processed food at the expense of non-processed food. People are getting away from their traditional diets, which are more based on non-processed food. However, the story is not that simple, because one could also argue that supermarkets bring food security and food diversity. They contribute to food security and food diversity, and they would even make fresh fruits and vegetables available to some populations which before had not access to. So this story is not so simple. So what do we know from the extremist people? There is a seminal contribution from Guatemala. I think that was the first study in a developing country, which we discovered. And the authors find that access to supermarkets is associated with lower consumption of fresh foods and higher consumption of added fats and sugars and processed food. Then there are 3 studies from Kenya, which are all based on the same data, which collected data in 3 small towns. And they show very similar results, that consumption of highly processed food increases when supermarket purchases increase. And this is also associated with higher calorie intake and greater dietary diversity. Right? The next Kenyan study shows, which is longitudinal, but still same baseline survey in same 3 towns, shows a shift away from fresh foods and vegetables in favor of processed meals and staples, but no increase in calorie consumption. Tunisia, we see a result which differs a little bit. Because here supermarket consumption is associated with higher quality diet. However, it is important to note that in Tunisia, supermarket purchases are associated with higher incomes. Right? And supermarket penetration is not that intense than in other countries. Then there is a study from Indonesia not showing any effect between the BMI and supermarket purchases. So what about the exposure to fast food? There is a lot of research, but most of this research was undertaken in the Western world, and they are in the United States. So I don't go into detail in these many studies, because there is also a literature review showing, at the one hand, that living in areas with high fast food concentration increases people's BMI. But this evidence is a kind of mix, because there are also many other studies not showing any effect. So our research question was, does exposure to big food and fast food affect obesity and overweight here in South Africa? That was our starting point. And then we thought, okay, how can we do that? Then we developed some novel aspects. So what is new in our studies, we are able to account for big food environments and fast food environments at the same time. We are using nationally representative data, and we are able to link these data to our own Google data, which we collected ourselves. So first part of the data that we use is the National Income Dynamics Study, which is hosted at the South African Labour and Development Research Unit, SALDU, at the University of Cape Town. NIDS is a very rich data set, it's a rich panel data set, and it conducts face-to-face interviews in all 9 South African provinces, and it is nationally representative. In principle, NIDS has a child questionnaire for children aged smaller than 15 and an adult questionnaire for people aged 15 plus. However, in our analysis, we were focusing on adult persons aged 20 years or older. So our raw sample consisted of more than 16,000 individuals after item done response. So, and now, this is what Mike was telling you before, a secure data provide full geocoding, GPS coordinates of every household, but they are only available at the secure data lab in Cape Town. So this is where I spent many hours to do our calculations.
Is why he deserves to be this one.
So the second part of our data, we had to collect the GPS coordinates of the supermarkets and the fast food outlets, right? So we wrote a program using the Google Places application program interface, also known as API. But you can imagine, you just open Google Maps and you go to Grahamstown and you put in supermarket, grocery store, and so on, and you get the usual ones that you have seen on the first slide, right? For Grahamstown. But if you want to have this for whole South Africa, is a bit more complicated. You cannot do it by hand, you have to develop a program and a code.
Okay.
So what did we do? We started with a map of South Africa and overlaid a grid with high resolution. Then for each of these grids, we sent the keywords grocery or supermarket together, the search category grocery or supermarket together with the keyword supermarket to Google. And then we ended up with almost 6,000 supermarkets over the country. And from these almost 6,000, we were selecting the well-known and important ones. And we did a similar procedure with the fast food outlets. Next slide. So how can you think of that? I mean, here we see South Africa with its neighboring countries. In the north, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique. Then here you have Eswatini, Lesotho, and the Indian and Atlantic Ocean, right? So the grid that you see here has a diagonal of 2 kilometers. So for each of these grid, we sent our Google request and got the result. And we collected the result. And then in the end, we dropped all duplicates. Next slide, please. And this is what we ended up for the supermarket. Of course, supermarkets agglomerate in the big cities, in the metropolitan areas, such as Cape Town, CBD here. I think we could spot Grahamstown somehow, but I can see East London. We clearly see Durban, and of course, we clearly see Johannesburg. Next slide, please. Similar things appear with fast food chains. Right? They even see more widespread over the country. Right? Next slide, please. And if you put both together, this is our Google data that we collected ourselves and that we are now able to link with the National Income Dynamics Study, which is a micro data set. All right, being able to do so, we were also able to calculate a number of distance measures, right? So we were interested in the distance of the household to the next supermarket, whether big or small, or whether the next supermarket, which is one of the biggest ones, and fast food restaurant, or both. So what are our outcome variables? NITS is a very rich data set, as I said before. So NITS collected data, individual data on BMI, from which we are able to construct whether someone is overweight, obese, and we are also able to construct and to calculate the waist to height ratio. In all of these three last measures, we used the WHO, World Health Organization cutoff points that some of you might be familiar. All right, of course, we also have to think of confounding variables, which could also play a big role in whether people are obese or not. And as Mike said before, household income is most particularly playing a role here, but also the level of physical activity we would believe is playing an important role. Moreover, subsistence farming, because this gives us information how whether people produce kind of their own food, unprocessed food. We also included geographic classification, whether someone lives in urban, rural, or farming areas. We included population density on the district level and dummy variables for all 9 provinces, and of course a number of socio-demographic variables such as gender, gender of household head, age, population group, household size, employment status, and educational level. So a rich set of variables that we were able to control for in our regression framework. This is then our regression model. It's a simple cross-sectional model, which is quite nice. And in case of our contingent variable BMI, we are using a simple OLS regression. In the case of the binary variables, where someone is obese or overweight or has central obesity, we were using simple logistic regression when our dependent variables were just binary. In all of these regressions, we were using the post-stratification weights and clustered standard errors to make our results even more conservative. Okay, I think we can skip this slide. This is just showing that our distance measures are quite robust, because, for example, in other studies, the distance measure was even used as an instrument, right? But now I'm coming to the results on the next slide, which you see here. So, first result, BMI is a dependent variable, and we are using a simple OLS framework. So what we clearly see here, all our 3 distance measures that are shown here in the columns 1, 2, and 3 show a significant negative effect on BMI. So what does this mean? When the distance to the closest supermarket increases, then BMI decreases. This is what we clearly see here in column 1, 2, and 3. And this is independent from which kind of distance measure we use, whether it's the distance to the big supermarket or to the fast food restaurant or to supermarket or fast food. Right? So what we can also say is we cannot separate the effects of supermarkets and fast foods, but we see that both together, the environment of big food and fast food, that they have an influence on BMI. And the same is the case when we take obesity as our dependent variable, run a logistic regression. We also see significant negative results, which means being further away from the big food and fast food environment increases the probability of being obese. And this, as you can also see, is shown in a very large sample of more than 16,000. Next slide, please. This is just for completeness sake. We observe similar results for the variable being overweight and also for the waist to height ratio, which is used to show central obesity. Next slide, please. So how large are these effects? From the logistic regression framework, it's often not so easy to tell, right? From the coefficients, you cannot really say how large these effects are, but you can see in which direction they are going and whether they are significant or not. So here, this graph is showing you the marginal effects. So for example, if you start very close to a supermarket, then the probability of being obese is 31%. This probability decreases the farther someone is living away from the supermarket. So people on average who are living 100 kilometers away from the supermarkets have a probability of being obese of 25%. Or in other words, you can also say every 20 kilometers farther away from the supermarket is reducing the probability of being obese by 1 to 1.2%.
Okay.
So I would say these effects are quite something. Next slide, please. So how can we sum up these results? First point I've just mentioned. Interestingly, there are also some interesting results regarding our confounding variables. So we see a positive and significant relationship between household size, being female, net equivalized household income, and overweight and obesity. Meaning, the larger the household size is, the more likely is it that people are overweight and obese. We see larger probabilities of being obese for females. Household income does indeed play a role. We see no effect for people who are only exercising less or once a week, but for the others who are doing exercise twice or 3 times or more per week, we see an effect that we would expect is going in the negative direction. So overweight and obesity are more pronounced about Arabs than Africans, which was our reference group. Compared to the reference category, Indians and Asians have significantly lower BMI and the lower risk of being obese. And white people have a higher probability of central obesity. So now that we have the results, that we have the summary of the results, what would this say in terms of policy implications? So at the time when we wrote this study and when we conducted our research, there was a national strategy for the prevention of obesity in South Africa, even a 5-year plan by the government. And they suggested to create an enabling environment that supports availability and accessibility of healthy food choices in various settings, and increase the percentage of population engaging in physical activity. To the last point, I totally agree. But the first point doesn't seem so simple, because healthy food choices also need to be accessible and affordable. And there was a big discussion at the time of the sugar tax. Mike, I think you can tell much more about it. And there were calculations how a 20% sugar tax could reduce obesity. So a 20% sugar tax at that time was calculated to reduce 3.8% of obesity in men and 2.4% in women. So even with 100% sugar tax, we would not get rid of this massive and large problem. So what we said, okay, the key determinant of obesity is diet. So understanding the link between food choices and food environment in which preferences are learned and expressed and reassessed is essential for successfully implementing food policies. And this is also what Hawkes mentioned in his study. So the key mechanisms are environment for healthy preference learning. That is, people should realize whether their preferences for food are healthy or not. They should learn about this. And of course, encouraging people to reassess existing unhealthy food preferences would also be a key policy implication. I'm already at the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much for that, Stefan.
Questions, please. Go ahead.
Okay, Risha.
Yes. No, I just wanted to say thank you so much for that presentation, Stefan. I think definitely marrying the two data sources is quite an interesting methodology that was used, and also just looking at the location of the big food and fast food stores on the maps using geolocation was, I think, very interesting for me. Also, your point about having healthy foods that's accessible and affordable. I think people, of course, have all of the intention, to make better diet choices, but then the question is it accessible, and then is it affordable? And if we just look at the cost of fruit, I think that's just like another debate on its own. And also, Mike, thank you for that wonderful introduction to the study and to the work that you and Stefan has been doing. It was, I think it really set the foundation for this presentation. But let me not take up any more time. We're going to now go into a time for questions and discussion. I think what we will do is we will take a round of questions from the room, and Professor Mbata will help to coordinate this. And then I would navigate the questions that are posed online. So also just a reminder for everyone that's joining us online, please can you post your questions in the chat box, and then we will go through them once we have addressed some questions from the room. So Prof. Mbata, over to you.
All right, so maybe we'll take 3 questions in the room. And then do you want to address those 3 questions? You can take 3 and then 3 online, or 3 and then you address them, and they can be posted to either one of you, I think. Will that work, Risha?
Yes, I'm very happy with that. We can go ahead with that, Prof.
Okay. Yes, please. Prof. Snowball.
Thank you. So thank you very much for that presentation. Really fascinating. So
Prof. Mbata. I think we lost connectivity somehow. I cannot hear anyone in the room. Yes, Sam. Yeah, we have lost sound. I think maybe it's load shedding in Makanda, but I think we're going to get some sort of feedback about it just now. Okay, so the electricity has just come back and connection will be restored. Okay, great. We will patiently wait. We can see everyone looking at the screen, but we still cannot hear anything. So okay, great. Yes, I was just typing that we need to unmute Bulela on his laptop. Okay, cool. We hear you now.
Okay, so the question was, no, you had not.
I didn't hear the last question. It's like, what is this?
We just ran into, for the people online, we just ran into load shedding. So, but we were approximately just about to ask a question. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So my question was about the size of the impact of our versus fast on the probability model. Overweight. And I mean, I know you said you're putting it sort of together, but those the size of those coefficients are different, right? So it was higher for fast coefficient bigger. And so I was wondering whether that makes sense intuitively, doesn't it, right? Fast food chains tend to sell high fat, high salt, things that the chicken is all the bad things. Yeah, yeah, nothing. Is that your particular? Yeah. So the question is, you didn't sort of talk about that at all. Policy implications.
The effects of supermarkets and fast food, right? Because having a fast food outlet somewhere is also a proxy for having a supermarket nearby, and the other way around, even more clearly, right? Because there are more fast food outlets over the countries. If you remember the blue dots, than supermarkets, right? So I would not go so far and say, look, this is the effect for fast food, this is the effect for supermarket. It's a joint effect of the food environment. That's how we ended up in our interpretation.
What if you control for that? So what if you somehow are able to control for supermarkets? I mean, the reason I'm hammering on this is because supermarkets sell both healthy foods and processed foods. Yeah. In different proportions, I guess, but if you imagine yourself in supermarkets, they usually have quite a big part of the supermarket that's unprocessed foods and staple foods. And so, yeah, I'm just wondering if, in terms of policies, we go for things like the sugar tax, but that sort of affects them equally, maybe it even affects supermarkets more. So, yeah, that's I was just thinking about whether some kind of more controls on the fast food outlets might be better.
I mean, what we cannot do is including both distance measures, right? Because these are highly convenient, right? So we have to either consider supermarkets or fast food, which we did in the regressions, or both. We are not able to separate these effects. In terms of policy implications, if we speak about a tax, yeah, so what you are mentioning is probably a fast food tax, but I don't really believe whether this tax would work, right? As we saw with the calculations for the sugar tax. So if you speak about other policy implications, such as making people aware and sensitive for what they eat, and maybe also making them aware to maybe change their preferences, it does not really matter, right? Whether it's supermarkets or fast food. What matters is unhealthy food and unhealthy diets and not enough exercise.
Not necessarily a tax, though. I mean, you could have like cigarettes. So on your chicken takeaway box, differences in the morning. You are allowed to consume 350% of your daily recommended, whatever calorie intake. Yeah.
So there are two kind of responses to that as well. One we included in the paper, one we didn't. So the one we didn't include in the paper is that the fast food places and the supermarkets are often right next to each other in South Africa, more so than other places. And there's an income effect there likely as well, because per meal, the fast food is at a higher level. You can get an unhealthy meal at a supermarket for lower if you're buying a constituent sort of part. But the thing that we did mention in the paper is that there's this literature in South Africa, specifically on townships, suggesting that the informal fast food places, and then we have these famous things like Dakota, are becoming really prevalent and are potentially driving some of these obesity effects. All the constituent parts come from supermarkets, but we're not able to control in our study for those as fast food or supermarket, but it's a sort of feature. But in terms of policy, the US is kind of a sort of promise. So they have what they refer to as food deserts in the US, and I think in Europe as well. So where low income people work, it's actually not possible to buy fresh food. So they often get convenience stores and fast food places. And they have found in various studies that the carrot seems to work better than the stick in terms of shifting diets in those food deserts. So rather than taxing, they've experimented with all sorts of things like product placement and subsidized fresh food. So when you walk in, instead of a tower of crisps, it's a tower of fruits that is marketed in a particular way, and the price is lower than it would otherwise be at a supermarket, even a convenience stores are even more expensive. I mean, that's you don't know if that will work, but there is some sort of there are ways to deal with it.
So have you been dropped off, Risha?
No, Prof, you haven't. We can
just
still
quickly,
hear.
It's
Yeah.
just
Thank you so much. This is really very interesting research.
Maybe to you.
Really, really very interesting. I'm interested in. One thing that came to my mind from your before the result, I would just a very simple one. What threshold was used for the logic model for obese and non-obese?
What did
The
we?
threshold of the BMI. Is it BMI?
WHO. Yeah, obese, BMI larger than 35,
Yeah.
and overweight and obese larger than 30.
Okay. Yeah.
If I remember correctly,
Yeah.
but I think that's
Sounds familiar.
yeah.
What?
sorry.
Okay.
Go on, go ahead.
The real question is about one of your findings, which I really find from the first impression, it would look counterintuitive, but I'm trying to think about it now. So you find a positive and significant relationship between household size, being female, and that's what that. If you are likely to be more obese.
Yeah. But this is what we see in the descriptives already.
Yeah. I'm trying to look at it from the point of view of intuition. One would have expected that female would be able to cook more food, homemade food, more healthy food than male in terms of eating. So why would female be more obese than male? Any explanation to that effect?
It's I mean,
How do you know?
I think there are two things. It's that way in every country. Women have higher rates. And the as the economic or socioeconomic poor compared to men. So we use we have a bunch of time use surveys in South Africa, and women work on average something like 15 to 20% more hours in productive and paid and unpaid work. So women have no time, which could translate into convenience as one particular possibility. But how much of it is physiological? I don't know. Because it's not close, right? 68% versus 31%. And if it's not just South Africa, it's not just something specific to our households or our food systems.
Okay, so the last question related to that has to do with the ratio comparison, more specifically for the female. Were you able to break it down to see which particular racial group? I know you had different racial. We say white are less like to be obese, but even for the female, if you look at the female, did you break it down according to the ratio to see what happened to Black, India, or the different races in terms of their female?
We could have looked at this more closely in the data. I'm sure we did at a certain point, but it doesn't result in mind anymore.
Yeah.
So I would love to, because it's something that will. Is it a case of a new trend that will be coming? The case that certain races are becoming more obese than they used to be, and what could be the possible reason? Maybe if a breakdown is done, it could give some insight into that.
When I walk in Nairobi, it's so clear. Like we just look different now. And it's funny, in 2015, the first time I was in Kenya, in Nairobi, I looked at the people and I thought, but I remember this picture from the 1980s. This is what we used to look like, because you know they're not obese in the majority of the people. Then I wondered, you know, whether or not it's because they have to walk more or it's their diets. But I see in both Kenya and Ghana, there are malls now where you find all of those big foods. Just malls with just South African products. There's Game, there's ShopRite, there's KFC in Accra. And, you know, one of your questions is what's going to happen and how long does it take to get to where we are?
And you are just speaking about Nairobi and Accra. What is happening if they are spreading out to the rural areas, to the poor parts of the urban areas? Then is also bigger consequences.
Yeah.
I think that raises a huge point. That this is a change. This is not something we're just noticing. This is an intense and rapid change. So if you want to understand what's driving, and you pointed out, we used to be like this not so long ago. So what else has been changing in South Africa? So what we would have hoped was happening was that income is improving, which means that people can now afford to buy food, and they're just making bad choices because they're not used to buying food. But real income is almost stagnant over the past 20 years. So that's not changing. Think of something else that might be changing. And it's hard to think of things. One of the things we point out in the paper, the thing that is changing, and we're not saying it's causal, but the expansion of supermarkets in South Africa and our supermarkets into the rest of Africa have been commented on by retail and people who look at value chains and food. People actually saying what we are doing to Africa, the US has done to the rest of the world in terms of their big food. And big food often sometimes people refer to the fast food and the sort of concentration of the big supermarkets groups as big food. It's just its expansion is changing, and obesity is changing, but a lot of other stuff that could explain it isn't changing.
Okay, maybe one more question from the room, Risha, and then you online. Yes, go ahead.
Children, environment, abuse, one of the big things that seem to happen is that when kids are little, they have similar sorts of use of the environment, but the older girls get, the less safe they are. So we were drawing maps of how you're using your environment, and the older girls were, the less they could actually go and play or go to their friend's class. They had to be constantly aware of only being able to go, like, I can go to the shop to meet my friends, whereas the boys, their parents didn't know where they were until they came home at night. So they were free to roam around wherever they wanted, and the older girls got, the smaller their worlds got, because they were less safe. And I'm wondering if that is another aspect that's interesting thing where you don't have, like in Dakar, you would have public sort of equipment for exercising on the beach that is safe things available, everyone has access to this. But we have less safe environments specifically for girls.
Okay, could we then move online? Risha, you have got access to all the questions online.
Yes, Prof. So far we've got one question and one comment, which is your comment, but I'll attend to the question first. It's from Mbali Kumalo. So the question is for either Prof. Rogan or Dr. Atterback. In terms of encouraging a change in those food preferences, what would their suggestions be for accounting for cultural, socio-cultural perspectives of consumers? So Prof. Rogan mentioned the Kota, and other examples would be Chisa and Yama, which are both places where people eat and socialize as communities, especially for young people. Even more traditional food is sometimes quite carb or meat heavy. How do we encourage the change in preference while accounting for cultural tastes from a policy perspective or more generally? I think we can open that to be answered, and for now, and then I will do your question, your comment, Prof. Mbata.
Yeah, you don't have to go to my comments.
Oh, okay, no problem. So
thi-
that's the only
I think-
question that we have for now online. Sorry,
Okay.
go ahead.
I think this is a good and very comprehensive question. So what I understood is that it is about preference learning, right? And yeah, this is a nice term, but changing preferences of people, this is not a thing what you do from now to then. This is very, very difficult. Also, when it comes to changing preferences for food and for a diet, I mean, this is, I think, a very, very long process. And yeah,
Alcohol?
Yeah.
You were thinking alcohol. I'm imagining savannah. Is there a way of figuring the association of, I don't know. Have you thought about the effect of that?
I'm never savannah. I'm never savannah.
You don't drink savannah? Which beer are you?
Um,
I don't know. Anyway, it's just
Thank you very much for the presentation. I've been looking forward to it for some time. I guess my first one, I will piggyback on Prof. Mbata's question. Looking at your results, right, that white people are more likely to be central obese.
Central obese, yeah.
Yeah. Walking outside, I guess I don't see it like that. So it's kind of just mind-boggling for me. And now I'm also wondering, what could this study opens up the question of the relationship between proximity to bars and weight gain, you know, because I feel like I don't know if it's common knowledge, but I could say women are less inclined to drink beer because of the beer gut. You know, you drink a lot of beer, you will gain weight, you know, and the traditional alcohol makes you gain weight because of the wheat and the sorghum, and it's very
The calories.
the calories are terrible. And so weight gain is basically the overconsumption of calories that you burn off. So I think the study would be very interesting with that. And then this also segues into my second question about the use of the WHO framework for obesity and the BMI scale. The use of such frameworks has been critiqued for being Western, and what the West calls obese might not be the same for what we call a big woman or a big man.
acceptable.
Exactly. And now the problem with that is it perpetuates the idea of what healthy looks like. Because someone might be 100, okay, maybe 100 is too much, 80 kgs and healthy, and someone might be 50 and completely malnourished. But on the scale, this person who weighs 50 is perfect, and the person who weighs 80 needs to lose a few pounds. So are there any, against political science perspective, any global South perspectives to it and the surrounding framework?
Okay, hold on. Think about it. Next. Very hard question.
So it's like, is there any reconceptualizing view, looking at it in a more contextual sense, like what she was saying? And secondly, I just wanted to comment on first your policy implications. You mentioned how we need to like conscientize people and make them aware of like healthy food choices, etc. I wanted to know what about like advertisements? Because oftentimes adverts, when people are exposed to incentivize like fast foods and alcohol and just like processed foods in general. So there's no incentives for them to eat healthy. One, number two, the prices of fruits and vegetables are like that. There's not incentivizing them as well. So it's a thing of people are making economic choices based on like massive persuasion from media, from advertisements, etc. And then just economically, they're making choices based on what's cheaper. So if I'm being persuaded and it's cheaper, I'm going to go with that as opposed to generally get this really expensive apple. So then how do we look at kind of getting the media on our side and like advertisements on our side? Yeah.
Last question, Prof. Michelle. Did you have your hand up? Oh, sorry. Okay.
I wanted to talk.
You wanted to, okay.
No, I wanted to talk on the journalistic side or point of view, because there's what we call the sponsored content, which is basically what she's talking about.
Okay.
Advertisement. So now how would it affect, advertising now? Because print media has its source of revenue, what we call as sponsored content, which is advertising. Wouldn't that now shrink to an extent of like extinction
For the media.
print media?
Already, yes.
And yeah, and also what policies are there now to kind of give a guideline to advertisers now, in terms of, because we are in a capitalistic and
So
yeah, so these are my questions now, because we do want people to be conscious of their decisions into what they consume and everything else. But then what policies would be there now to police what they
revenue.
And also now in terms of revenue,
Yeah.
to the already shrinking print media and all that.
Sure. Please think about ideas if you can. I know you're not in political science. You always say, oh, policy is not my area. I'm a data person. Prof. Mishak.
Policy is well our area if it's evidence-based.
Evidence-based, yes.
We can speak about ideas, but if they are not based on evidence and facts.
Yes,
it's just ideas. I think I have a few good answers to some of your questions.
Okay.
Alcohol consumption is a very good point. And there is even a variable in the National Income Dynamic Study asking people how often do you drink alcohol per week? And included, we included this variable, but when we had a look at the variable, then we also saw that people are underestimating their alcohol consumption because there were only few people drinking alcohol. So we decided, okay, we ran a regression with this variable. It didn't change anything, but then we decided, hey, this variable is not reflecting the reality, right? Because people were not telling the truth. And this is often the case if you have self-assessed behavioral variables, right? So also income is something similar. If I would ask them, Jen, what is your income? You would say, this is not your business, right? It's not your business. So you have a lot of non-response. You have a lot of not correct. It's a sin. It's a sin. Drinking is a sin. Another answer to your BMI question. Of course, BMI is not the prime measure that we want to have. But this is a general population survey. This is not even a health survey. So this is just a proxy that you can easily get. Yeah, because everybody more or less even knows his or her weight. We also know our height. If we don't know, then we look in our passport and then we see our height, right? So this is a measure that you can easily get. Of course, it would be much better to know how the body fat is distributed, right? Or whether your weight is made by fat, body fat, or muscles, right? Would be much better. But this is in this case, it's the best that we could get. Unfortunately, this is the reality that we have to deal with. But you had even more questions.
Yeah, the thing about bars too is a good one. So, but we probably picked up some of that because bottle shops, most supermarkets have their own bottle shop next door, and then In South Africa, there's retail so much more concentrated. Where there's a string of shops, there's a bottle shop. So we're likely to be picking up some of that, but then the same thing with the informal fast food. You know, we're not picking up taverns or shebeens and bars and restaurants and that sort of thing. So I mean, we kind of went into it with accepting that sort of limitation that we couldn't pick up everything. Some of our measure picks up bottle shops, but not all of it. Yeah, and you know, the BMI is just a very rough proxy, as Stefan said, because this is the sort of the data. But you notice one of the outputs, we didn't force the overweight or the obese category. We just measured BMI to see how your weight or your height ratio increases. We didn't say at this point in this population, this is obese. We just saw an effect that no matter how we measured it, without setting a threshold, it was still there's a link between supermarket access and weighing more, without even saying which is too much and which is not. Yeah, and then you know, there's I think a lot of it comes down to the carrot or the stick. So the advertising would be more the stick, right? Telling people what's bad for them, perhaps, or maybe telling maybe a bit of a carrot, telling people what's good for them. But I think one way to think about it is, you know, we're the most unequal country in the world in terms of income. So some obesity is caused by people spending money they don't even have to think about to buy whatever will taste good or sort of satisfy their immediate interests. It strikes me that advertising and information would be a better strategy for that particular group. But 55% of South Africans are below the income poverty line, which means that on a monthly basis, they'll be lucky to have enough food for everybody in their household. So advertising plays some role, or information plays some role with that group, but that's the majority. And it strikes me that finding ways to have affordable, accessible, healthy food for that particular group would be a slightly different strategy than for the upper income group. So how do you do that? I mean, is the tricky thing. In South Africa, we also talk about pop, which is maize meal, which is a staple, but is empty calories. So it adds weight without adding nutrients. And I think it's slightly wishful thinking to change an entire country's preferences. Think about the Mediterranean diets and the Japanese diet. Those are people who populations that live much longer than other populations, and people just put it down to the food that's culturally appropriate for them. It happens to be healthier than their neighboring or most other countries. So I don't think we're going to shift our diet completely, but what things can we do that are implementable to get people to? I think the focus should be at the bottom end of the income distribution rather than focus at the top. But what is it we can do? Because affordability of healthy food is an issue, and that's something that I think is more urgent than shaping the preferences or fiddling with the tastes and behaviors of people at the top of the income distribution. But there's room for both, I would think. Media?
Oh, that was your advertisement.
Maybe one more comment to the advertisement.
Mhm.
It's the big food industry and the fast food industry who put the advertisements, and they want to make money. They have the function, okay, how much do I spend on advertising? How much more money do I make? This is the goal function that they are having. So they don't care about healthy lifestyles and healthy diets. And I do not see any way to how to force them to bring healthy diets into their advertisement strategies unless the customer says, look, if you don't sell healthy food, I don't come to your fast food restaurant. Right?
And by the way, big food is a derogatory term. So if you see an article in the literature that describes it as big food, that's not people in favor of supermarkets. So the solutions will be oriented towards something more punitive, I think. So in South Africa, Dave Sanders was one of the people who, the public health literature, who used that term, big food, to describe our food distribution and environment. And I think he came down quite heavily on not so much advertising, but information that's required on packaging and things like that. And he was quite confident in that strategy. And I think it's probably one, but I can't see it being the strategy to stop the obesity epidemic, we'll call it that.
Do you think cigarettes, the banning of that was quite a stick, you know? Interesting to see where that had an effect, just removing its advertising.
Yeah.
Even in some countries, you can't even find it on the, you know, when you walk into a supermarket, it's normally, you don't find it, it's not allowed.
It's also
Anyway.
quite asking what caused fast foods, like the bigger fast foods like McDonald's, to start. Their menus are very different than they used to be. They offer healthy food now. I don't know if you should, but you know, something caused them, and I think it was a push from consumers. So perhaps there was some longer term consumer awareness. Sort of said, you know, if we're going to take our family here, there's got to be a salad. Right?
I think there's another dimension to the whole issue of food, which is affecting the production, is the population growth. The more the population grows, the more there is pressure to produce food to feed as many people as possible in a convenient way as possible. And when you do that, then the quality reduces, because to produce quality, be it from the farm, to produce quality healthy food, genetically not modified food, it requires more space, more time. Hence, in order to serve a larger population, you need to produce bad food and feed the population with it. So there's a population growth issue. There's also a commercial aspect of it where big businesses want to make more money, profit. Hence, they want to produce and supply to the market in large quantities and advertise in such a way that people will buy it. I do not think that these two dimensions, they need to feed more people quickly at a conveniently, and the need to make more money will be easily controlled. So those challenges will be there. But coming to your question of the men, initially we talked about having pot belly. I think a lot of research have shown that sugar, eating of sugar, produce the same effect as, if not worse than beer. So whatever produce that are now available that are related with sugar is causing the same effect as the pot belly that we see from the So it depends on what you eat. You may be drinking beer in a sweet way, not the traditional beer.
Remember also Stefan's point from the slides that there is a physiological relationship between being malnourished early in life and obese later. So when someone with a malnourished or undernourished diet encounters through transition to a higher income state, has a high calorie diet, the likelihood of obesity is higher. So there is some relationship between earlier states in the same person, not in population. So there are some physiological complexities which come from the actual nutrition literature, which play into that as well.
Yes, I was kind of wondering, having last
comment from the room, and then we see who's online.
Yes, please.
I was wondering if the sort of relatively recent increase in obesity in South Africa is not also linked to the rising household income levels, because then things that you could not afford before, you can now afford, you know. So maybe you were buying a brown bread before, but white bread is less healthy, but it's regarded as a treat, right? This is like something you want to have, or chocolates. And now you can afford all these things. And so then the preference becomes to the things that you previously regarded as a bit of luxury. The same with fast food, right? For a lot of South Africans, fast food is not cheaper than buying the real ingredients and making it yourself. So you would see this as a treat. In my family, certainly, you know, end of the month, yay, we can have pizza or whatever. But what if you have enough money that you can have pizza every night? And then maybe, so maybe it's that transition that's driving some of this as well, but I don't expect an answer. Just
What we would have loved to observe and to analyze would have been people's shopping baskets, right? In this context. I mean, this would be such a rich data source. Would have been great. We even thought of doing an own study, right? Going to Pick and Pay and look what people are buying. And then make our own small survey. I mean, this would be amazing.
yeah.
Okay.
I do that on an individual level.
Really?
It's got a lot of chips in their bag.
Risha,
Okay, yes.
online.
Yes, Prof. So I have about two questions and a comment. So the first question would be, is from Mbali again. Would the impact of the worsening energy crisis be something to note in terms of the expansion of fast food outlets, maybe more so going forward than in the past? Stage 6 for many people usually means eating out or takeaway rather than trusting the food that has been in the fridge for about 8 hours or more. So do the speakers anticipate that this could be in part account for increased proliferation of fast food outlets and demand in South Africa, or not so much? Then we've got a comment from Sam. So he's read anthropologists talking about what he says is probably common knowledge, that how in some groups not being thin is linked to status. So he said, for example, Eric Barre speaks about chatting to someone who pointed to both of their bellies and referred to them as a lot of public opinion. Okay, and then we have one more comment about advertising. There's an economic literature that's emerged in the last few years suggesting that advertising is probably far less effective than generally thought in shaping preferences. Still very debatable, but perhaps interesting to consider. So that's what we got online. And if I could just add, Mike and Stefan, did you also look at the age breakdown? And is there some sort of, well, I mean, could we possibly say there's some sort of link between sort of younger middle-aged people who have maybe taken a step up on the socioeconomic ladder, and then their sort of obesity and overweight levels? And I guess this is linked to what Prof. Snowball mentioned about now earning more and being able to purchase these high-calorie foods. Okay, yeah, so that's everything from us online. You guys are free to respond.
We've got 3 minutes to
Yes.
respond.
Yeah, that's a great point about the energy crisis. I can see that at our own shopping center. I mean, load shedding's at 7, that place is heaving with people trying to get quick food before the lights go out. What impact it makes at the national level, it's hard to say. I can see the logic of it, but entirely possible. Obviously we didn't look at that, but yeah, it's worth thinking about. I do think that would largely be an upper income situation. I don't think poor households are taking advantage of convenience food because of lack of energy. Several people mentioned along the way the idea of being linked with status, particularly in a context where the majority of the population was restricted in their economic opportunities. It's one way of showing you have abundance, type of thing. And I get that happens. I'm just not sure it explains the increase we've seen and the period in which we've seen that increase, because I think that phenomenon has been around, and I'm not sure it's changing to the extent. Remember, we are looking for something that's changed quite drastically. We didn't find it change drastically, but that's the context which got us thinking. So if it isn't something that's could be a part of it, but if it hasn't changed drastically, it's not the driving thing. I don't know about advertising. We didn't really look at that literature, but of course we're aware of it because it came into some of the policy recommendations, as well as examples of what's worked and what hasn't worked in other contexts. And then in terms of age, I got that question was linked to the social mobility question, which is kind of what Jen was getting at as well. What happens when we come from and also it's lacking, and you suddenly get because you have a job and you can buy fast food whenever you want. So we have one of the lowest levels of social mobility around, particularly compared to other middle income countries. So we undoubtedly have people who are the first people who went to university. The public sector has ensured that many people are the first in their families to ever have permanent jobs. There's even a book that was launched in this very room called The New Black Middle Class. So there is a phenomenon where people are having the choice to buy convenience food for the first time. It just doesn't seem that that's been happening as fast as obesity has been picking up. And it also isn't quite in that. We're getting conflicting signals about whether that could be, but I can't help but think that is at least some part of the story, right? It just makes sense. I mean, that book by yourself is really interesting because he talked about the experience of being the first person in your family to make it, and speaks to the black, what's called the black tax. Yeah, and you find that people buy themselves a nice car, a nice set of clothes. The rest of the money goes to extended family and to bring up the next generation. Although maybe some of that goes towards working late nights in your car. You go through the drive-through and get fast food. You know, obviously that happens, but whether or not it's the driving thing behind obesity. And again, there's obesity at both ends of the income spectrum. So there's something else going on, and we think it's to do with our food system and big food's role in it. Although it's clearly not the only thing.
So one more comment on that. I mean, we controlled for income, right? So we took the effective income already away. And that is also we controlled for age, so that the age effect is already somewhere else in another variable. So our distance to the supermarket effect is clear from age and income. Right?
By the way, in the middle of the pandemic, the journal editor wanted us to go to the data room and just add one variable, which was income squared. To look at the concave shape of the effect between, the turning points between income and obesity.
Colleagues, we've come to the end. I please do not eat this sugar.
You should put some carrots and like cherry tomatoes and things like that.
Yeah. So thank you so much, colleagues in the room. Richard, please just thank everybody else in the online, and then we are done. If you're interested in sitting, and Stefan is happy to sit around a bit more, that will happen. But let's close it, Richard.
Yes, definitely. I think that was definitely a fantastic presentation. No doubt, we can see that from the engagement, and I think we could definitely chat more about it. But so this definitely has been a very informative discussion, and thank you so much to Professor Rogan and Dr. Otterback for sharing the study with us. It was a very important discussion as we try to sort of forge our way towards a healthier, better society, if possible. So also please follow our social media channels, and this recording will be made available online. Thank you so much for everyone who has joined us in the seminar room and everyone who has joined us online. We really appreciate your continued support for our seminars. So thank you very much and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Say the paper is available.